Hi, if you're here from my last video, I'll hazard a guess you know what Need for Speed is. Do you remember when they got into a weird fight on Twitter with Toyota? Do you remember how they didn't have like any of the cool Toyotas in any of the racing games that you and I might like for like years, and then they all got added back in like basically overnight? If you're normal instead and play Call of Duty, remember how at some point their guns just became fake? Like, instead of a Heckler & Koch MP5, you'd be holding a, I don't know the name, I don't play Call of Duty, I'm not gonna lie, but it looks like an MP5, isn't quite the same, and has a weird name on it. Yeah, why is that again? Why does that happen? Well, this video is going to be a deeper, relatively speaking, dive on video games as art, trademark, how it relates to art, IP protection, enclosure, and a bunch of other concepts with a lot of fun stories, so stick around. Trademark is a intellectual property. Trademark seeks to distinguish a company's goods and or services that they sell to people, usually, from other companies' goods and services. Basically, an iPhone, for example, I imagine is the trademark of Apple. I didn't look this up, I'm not providing a source. If I am wrong, that's insane. It protects words, phrases, symbols, designs, or a combination of these that identify and distinguish the source of goods and services. So say I wanted to include in my video game that I am making right now that you should follow me for, a Porsche 911. I would need to not do that. I would need to just draw up something that looks similar to a 911, not exactly the same, and not call it a 911 and not call it a Porsche. But I can do that in this. I can just show you a 911, I can call it a 911, I can refer to it as a 911, and say you're watching a movie. Chances are, at least in one of those, there's a Porsche 911, and how are they able to do this? Well, there's two ways. So number one is with licensing, where you go to Stuttgart or send them an email, nowadays we have the internet, and you just talk to the executives over there and are like, hey, can we show your product in our work of art? And they might be like, yeah, go for it. Or they might be like, you need to pay us $1 million. Or they might be like, hey, we'll pay you $1 million because this is basically free advertising otherwise. Or they might be like, you pay us $1 million and plus say you're not allowed to repaint our cars or show them crashing or show them exploding under any circumstances. This is called a license. They would be officially licensing you to depict their trademark in your work. Now, the other option is far more interesting to me, because I am poor and I do not have $1 million. Hypothetical number, not real. I don't know what Porsche will charge me. I will not ask them. The other option is fair use. Fair use is that thing YouTubers claim to get out of copyright infringement, namely a US policy in which under certain very specific conditions you can use copyrighted material without specific permission from the trademark or copyright holder. Let's cover some case law in the US once again to see when it has worked or not in video games. Both of these examples are going to be just shooters, right? There's EA with Battlefield, who after the Sandy Hook shooting did not want to be seen as in bed with gun manufacturers because there was a lot of bad publicity about that at the time. So they did not license any of their firearms that they put in, I think, Battlefield 4. This was a huge spat at the time. There's a lot of articles about it. I'll link one in the description. But what you need to know is that it got settled out of court. We have no information. We don't know what happened. We don't know what this means. Well, we know what this means. It means nothing. It doesn't mean that I can use the same guns Battlefield 4 had in my own game without also being sued and pushed into either a settlement or so on and so forth. So the more interesting case is specifically with Activision Blizzard. They were sued by Mil-Spec Monkey, a apparel manufacturer, for stuff that was in COD Ghosts. I don't know what this stuff is because no one played COD Ghost, so I don't know how this lawsuit even came to happen, I'm not gonna lie. And the more important one, and really the one I can get any information on, is AM General. AM General is the people who make Humvee, the military version of the Hummer, the off-road thing that American soldiers ride around in the Middle East. Yeah, that. It turns out that Activision Blizzard, for their Call of Duty games, never paid AM General anything or told them anything about featuring their vehicles in their modern warfare games, right? And this, pleasantly speaking, ended in the favor of Activision Blizzard and Call of Duty. The judge decided that Call of Duty is art, and it is rather realistic and normal that in something depicting the recent wars in the Middle East, you would have a Humvee, the thing that people rode around in the Middle East. In fact, I have a quote right here: "If realism is an artistic goal, then the presence in modern warfare games of vehicles employed by actual militaries undoubtedly furthers that goal." So, cut and dry, right? I should be able to just have a Humvee in my racing game. Well, not really. We'll go into why that happens. And right before I explain the specifics, I want to cover one case where nothing happened. Now, I cannot conclusively say this was fair use, but in 2001, Remedy Entertainment with 3D Realms released Max Payne, a huge banger that holds up to this day. This series is now distributed and owned by Rockstar Games, one of the biggest video game developers on Earth, and you can still acquire the original 2001 Max Payne. The part that is relevant about this beautiful game to us is the game names and displays a Beretta pistol as well as a Mercedes car. The Mercedes car in question is owned by a mob boss, has the license plate vodka, and is used in aid of many crimes. Now, you would expect in the modern day, if I talk about a Beretta or show a Mercedes in my video game and call it a Mercedes, I would immediately be sued. And yet, Remedy and Max Payne and now Rockstar, who still distribute this game, have not been. And we need to ask, why not?
Mercedes didn't have internet, Beretta also didn't have internet. None of these people have children who played this very popular game. Maybe they saw it as positive press, so they left it alone. This is actually a real possibility, unlike the previous two, right? And maybe this is actually fair use. How is it that Max Payne and Remedy and now Rockstar have gotten away with this for 20 odd years? Well, so the way fair use is evaluated, and the reason Call of Duty also got away with it, is something called, at least in the US, the Rogers test. This looks to two things specifically. A, misleading. So, is the audience potentially thinking that you are being paid money by this company to show this thing? Is the audience thinking that this is made with explicit approval, license, sponsorship, or anything of the sort from the trademark holder? Or do they think, no, this is just something they've made that happens to have that, right? And secondarily, there is artistic relevance. Is it relevant to the work? Does it need to be there? There's something interesting here, as in the misleadingness part of this means that if, for example, you are making a video game where these things tend to be licensed and approved by the manufacturers, if you were to not do that, especially with relation to a car which is always licensed in a video game almost, you're getting sued. You're just straight up getting sued on account of this is the standard expectation. So even if you have a clear disclaimer saying that this is not licensed and not approved of by the manufacturer and not sponsored, that could still be an assumption, and you are at least definitely going to have to fight that out in court, which is again more expensive than you or I could ever afford. Now, the artistic relevance part is also interesting, as in it encourages some amount of restraint, where it's like you cannot be gratuitous with your featuring of a IP protected thing. You can't just have the Humvee on the cover of the Call of Duty game and advertise it with the feature of you can ride around in a Humvee,
right? And unfortunately, that goes beyond this is relevant to the thing I'm depicting and becomes a feature of the thing you're depicting, an integral part of it, which doesn't quite work the same.
So the original way in which I intended to end this video didn't pan out. First and foremost because I can't sit in that park because there was so much construction machinery, thank God for Montreal. And also, more importantly, the original conclusion was simply going to be that this was all BS. That there is a oligopoly among these like huge and decreasing number of big corporations that have billion-dollar budgets for their titles in the games industry, that there was collusion between them to let themselves get a little bit extorted by rights holders and trademark and intellectual property, so that the million-dollar companies, even like not even like people like me making games in their bedroom, but literal millionaires, still couldn't make the same sort of games they can because they have no access to even talking to the right people, let alone the budgets to pay for the licensing fee. That when Activision Blizzard wins that lawsuit, that's actually bad for them, because suddenly EA has to neither pay the license fee nor the lawyer fees to win the lawsuit when they don't pay the license fee. So it just brings down the barriers to competition and puts you at a relative disadvantage to your existing competition. However, much like my plans to finish this video in the park, I realized that that conclusion was a naive one. At the end of the day, it's not that there is an oligopoly, it's not that there is some amount of collusion. I do believe that this is the case. However, part of it is trademark and intellectual property law is defined just loosely enough that the big companies can sue you, and just strongly enough that the big companies can sue you. No matter what happens, you're getting sued. Now, I don't mean to sit here and tell you that all trademark and all intellectual property are bad and should be abolished. I fundamentally like that I can make a video game, have the idea of that video game be mine, and even if you have a copy of it, I don't think you should be able to sell it on your own website without giving me a kickback without my notification of such, right? I also don't want AI to scrape your or my work and then replicate it without credit attribution or like some amount of pay. Not that that seems to stop AI from doing all of that though, and that is where I'm getting at. Due to this double standard, video games, despite being more democratized than ever for the production of them, is still treated to a double standard as if it's not recognized as art in so many jurisdictions, where you just have a harder time covering and talking about the sorts of things that a filmmaker can do without having to question, am I going to get sued for this? And the thing is, even if you read the letter of the law, you do your casework and you do something that is squarely fair use, right? It's parody, it's criticism, it's genuine cultural production that transforms the source material. Guess what? You're still getting sued and you don't have enough pocket change to handle that lawsuit. So not only are we treated to a harsher standard, there is also a minimum you must be this rich to try. And I just don't think it is very good for our culture, the arts, human expression, parody, critique, criticism, all of those things, that we are in this weird bind with regards to video games. Again, the biggest art and entertainment format there is right now. That what we can and can't say has to be self-policed preemptively so that some corporation doesn't tell you to shut the fuck up. In conclusion, there have been cases in video games where people haven't had to license their stuff. There have been cases where there were literal legal cases that were won by the video games in question, even if they were actually Call of Duty. So things aren't without hope. However, the law, because it applies as a double standard, and because even if it didn't, you couldn't take on a lawsuit, effectively limits out who can say what in the context of making a video game. And this just sucks.
right? You see all of these videos out there about how, like, oh, why Toyota didn't make it into Need for Speed, or like why this happens or that happens, usually again in relation to racing games. But I didn't see that anyone was covering the actual legal framework that enables this. And I did genuinely think that there was no actual legal framework and they were just making it up because movies can do it, why can't we? Turns out it is significantly worse. We actually can't. We just aren't allowed to do the same things as artists in other formats. I don't know how else to put this. This just sucks. And I am sorry I didn't have a better conclusion. Tune back in whenever I get the motivation to assemble the next video about whether video games are art or not and what other people have said about it. Hopefully I can clean up the audio from the earlier sections just enough that it's not super bad. Thank you for tuning in. If you've come this far, please like and subscribe.